Are you tired of the same old streaming options? Introducing Myco, the revolutionary Web3 content platform where you can not only watch films, TV shows, user-generated content, live events, and listen to podcasts, but earn from them too. Myco commissions and produces content that connects and empowers both viewers and creators in a fully decentralized video ecosystem. With live monetization, crowdfunding, NFT gating, and even the opportunity for fractional ownership of content, Myco is changing the game. Myco, join the conversation and start earning today. Download the app from the Apple and Google Play app stores.
Telecast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's Telecast. On this week's show, Arun Maljaars, Director of Content and Channels for Insight TV, joins me alongside Richard Middleton, Editor at Television Business International. Peter White from Deadline joins us with the latest Hollywood TV industry news, as the first scripted show on US soil to restart production kicks off. And K7 Media's Girts Licis takes us on a whistle-stop tour of the world's production sets and gives us some tips on lessons already learned from TV markets overcoming COVID. It's all coming up on this week's Telecast. So before we kick off this week's show, I just wanted to let you know that this week we've launched a number of advertising and sponsorship options on Telecast. Our aim is to keep on investing in the quality of the show and bring in even more great features that you, our listeners, will love. So, if you want to promote your brands, content or services on the international TV industry's fastest growing podcasts, get in touch with me at justin@boomdialogue.com. That's justin@boomdialogue.com to find out more. I'll put that email address in the episode description as well. So our first guest in this week's show is a familiar name on the international TV circuit, especially at MIPCOM. Arun Maljaars is Director of Content and Channels at Insight TV, the world's leading 4K UHD channel. He's responsible for all Insight TV channels, the content that goes on them, and the direction of original content. And Richard Middleton is Editor at Television Business International. He leads on all aspects of the market-leading title's editorial business. Richard spent the past 7 years covering the global TV business, latterly as editor of C21's flagship magazine, C21 International, and before that he worked for the BBC, amongst others. So welcome to the show, Arun Maljaars and Richard Middleton. How are you doing, guys?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Justin.
Great, yeah, thanks for the invite.
Great to have you on Telecast. Arun, let's start with you. So everyone's seen the very striking Insight TV branding, whether that's actually in the Palais on your booth or that very impressive installation that you had outside the Grand Hotel one, MIPCOM, I think it was a couple of years ago. And I think we're all clear on your 4K offer as a channel. But can you just bring us up to date on the distribution of Insight TV, how consumers can access Insight TV?
Yeah, no, thanks. So that sounds like it was forever launching Insight TV of the Lawn of the Grand with like that big statue. And, it's good that you refer to it because everyone is still talking about that and also our structure at NetB, but it feels like forever. It's good that you asked like the question on the 4K and the positioning. So because we have changed a little bit, when we started, it was more like 4K was the pillar. Along the way, we positioned ourselves more from a brand and content perspective. We're focusing on the millennial generation, and our tagline is here to tell a story. So it's all about telling a story, unscripted from the communities where we find interesting stories around the world, whether that's street art, football, or esports these days. It's all about fresh, creative, new content, new formats, but shot in 4K UHD HDR. So I always envision the editorial, the creative needs to be leading. The show needs to be interesting, and when that happens, we can add on. By the way, and it's also in the highest quality. But the story and the creative needs to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's the brand positioning some more of the channel along the way. So we have our main flagship is indeed our 4K UHD HDR 4K channel, 24/7, delivered via satellite to cable operators. The second thing, we also have our HG channel. The business model there is obviously advertising on GRP basis. The third one, and that's an interesting trend. It's everyone calls it a little bit different. It's what I'll name it like digital linear streams, basically. So in the US, the trend started in the US with Samsung TV Plus, which is basically an app on your TV, but it's pre-installed and it always goes back to that kind of application. And you have all kinds of channels, I believe 120 channels now, delivered via IP, but still linear schedule.
Yeah.
And that's a free service, but that's been taken off massively. That will be more into the future because a lot of other platforms are also starting or continuing these kind of services, like Pluto TV or Vizio with their same similar service. And we've seen Amazon will start one of those services right now. And the interesting thing there is that we always thought like there is no place for linear TV anymore in the world, but we sometimes I think we confuse the demise of television or linear TV with people don't like to pay those cable bills anymore. Because if you look at the uptake, the millions of views we are getting on our channel every month on a linear basis on some of those services actually shows that people still like to come home, switch on the TV, let something run, do maybe something else, and then sit back and relax while they're getting content getting served. And then, of course, then they go into like maybe I'll watch a movie and then I'll go into the Netflix or Amazon of the world. But that's a really interesting distribution model for us right now.
So it's linear. You're available through linear through apps on smart TVs, but you're also available through smartphones.
Yes, we have our asphalt model inside.tv where everyone in the world can watch our series there for an amount. To be really honest, we're not marketing that heavily, but it is there for when people like to they can Inside TV might not be available in certain territories, but because of our social media influencers, if you would like to have a buzzword there, they do come across our channel and our promotions, and they do like to watch some of the content. And of course, if you're aiming for a millennial or younger generation, you need to be found online somewhere as well.
Yeah,
and that's where the apps and the platform come in.
Yeah, and talking about global influencers, so you describe your content as vivid stories about trending communities through global influencers. So I was watching a show last night on the app about street art in Ibiza, and I have to say, look, it did look fantastic. The quality that came over on the smartphone. What's your content strategy in terms of commissioning and acquiring content?
We try to commission most of our shows, which is becoming with this current pandemic a little bit more difficult on the budget side. So we're also continue starting up co-productions, but maybe more on that later. To come back to your question, content strategy, if you take your example of the Street Art Challenge show, of course, I'm happy that you're saying the images look great, but the story, I hope, was also really intriguing because I really like that show from the fact that we were putting two different street artists or street graffiti artists, so like one from one part of the world and the other one from the other one, and we both combine them in Ibiza, and they have to create together an artwork. So what is going to happen, let's say, you are more into cubics, for instance, that's your style, and my style is a lot of colors. So somehow we need to come up with something for that community to create together.
Looking for a clash of artistic temperament there.
Exactly, and all of those characters are pretty interesting, and they have a strong opinion, and they're young. So it's like the combination together with art is something where on the digital side, but also in social media, and I think in our daily lives, street art makes total sense to actually do a show on. Just go on content strategy. We have something within our company is called Inside TV Labs, where we research every topic and how big the topic and what kind of future it has.
Yeah.
So of course, we did a show on esports, which is like one of the most booming things over the past few years. It was a challenge because we didn't want to go into like those dungeons and only film people there. So it's always about the story. What is driving these people and what is their story and how does it fit into the more global scenery of that community. So to go through the greenlight process, we're checking who is the talent, where they resonate, what is the topic, where does that resonate. So that's how we determine future shows.
Okay. You say you like to commission most of your content. Can you give us an idea of how many hours that is a year?
So we're aiming to do 200 hours per year to produce. Of course, during this pandemic, it's a little bit more difficult to reach that amount of hours. And of course, sometimes things happen in production here and there where you don't meet that. But that's what we're striving for, yeah.
Okay. And presumably now, how the pandemic has affected your business, how have you found that affecting viewing figures, both on linear and your SVOD channel?
So I think across the board, everyone has seen that the viewing figures during pandemic were skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Some of our viewership doubled or even tripled weekly and even monthly.
Wow.
So that has been great. The downside, especially in February, March, and April, was that the advertisers weren't there. So because everyone put a hold on their marketing budget, which affects the ad spend. But in May we already saw like a growth figure again, and also for June, if I look at some of the dashboards, it's looking promising again that we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, in terms of your commissioning strategy, hopefully that's starting to pick up in different places around the world now, the ability to produce as we come out of lockdown. How is that going to affect the channel when we come to sort of 6 months' time, in terms of what's going to be playing out? I mean, are you going to be looking to acquire 4K HD content when we may have a shortage of new original content in 6 months' time?
So that's always been the difficulty for us, because our 4K standards, 4K HDR standards are so high that it's difficult to find content. There is content out there, but it's always like really beautifully shot nature or space from above or something, which is great, but we're trying to tell a story. So it needs to be storytelling. It needs to be engaging for our target audience. To look at 4 or 5 months ahead, we did finish a lot of productions just before lockdown hit. So I from the looks of it, we should be okay until the end of the year with big launches. At the same time, we had a few new productions almost starting. I think the challenge for us now, and I think for the rest of the world, is to figure out which countries are safe. How can we travel here and there? Maybe already in July to do like social distancing shooting, filming, to get some of those productions finished. So we have some more on the shelf to start premiering.
Yeah.
And even, of course, everyone is scared of a wave 2 or wave 3 in October. So we're definitely looking at that. Maybe there are some countries where it's pretty safe to film, and we can travel in the near future to get some of those productions which are already lined up done in the next few months. So we have some more runway.
Okay. Well, really interesting, and obviously good luck with everything on Insight TV. As you said, the stories are very key to what you do, as opposed to purely the quality of the content from a visual perspective.
Of course, thanks.
Richard, welcome to the show. Great to have you on here. We've been trying to get you on for a little while, and delighted that you're with us. TBI, Television Business International, one of the most established and respected trade media outlets in the content industry, and part of the Informer Group, which is obviously one of the biggest trade show producers around the world. So must have been a turbulent time for you, particularly over the last 3 months.
Yeah, I think like everyone, it's been a busy and challenging time. As you say, turbulence has definitely come with the past couple of months. I mean, on a TBI front, we moved pretty quickly. We just put out our TV edition, so that still went to press, and then after that, it was clear, obviously, that COVID was here to stay for the next foreseeable couple of months at least. So we turned all our attention to making sure that we provided the best coverage we could on that front. The beauty about TBI is we're very obviously internationally facing, so we've been getting insights from all over the world on sort of how the content industry has reacted. And I mean, one of the key things that we noticed is the speed at which producers did manage to adapt. Obviously, for scripted and high budget premium drama, it's different. But where producers were working in sort of factual and archive, they were very, very quick to turn stuff around, make sure that they were pitching broadcasters. There seemed to be a real understanding of the situation very quickly on that front. So we've been running lots of pieces from producers all over the place. So we had guys out in Australia writing pieces for us about sort of how they've adapted. They were shooting one of them was shooting a show in a zoo in Sydney, and it was all about sort of how they weren't allowed in the zoo, so they strapped the cameras onto the people who were allowed in the zoo. Little workarounds like that. So we've moved into lots of COVID coverage. We've also launched TBI Talks, which is our new sort of online discussion portal. So getting lots of international execs on. So we've heard from streamers from some of the leading players in the Middle East. We had BritBox over from the US. We had UK TV. Discussing about the opportunities, because there's been a huge impact in terms of what coronavirus has done to the production industry and the content industry as a whole. But there are opportunities emerging. So we've been keen to try and focus on that and obviously provide as much information as we can for all the production guys, the distribution guys who are trying to react. And then, as you say, on the Informer side, so TBI is part of Informer, which is, as you say, I think probably the world's biggest show producer.
Yeah.
So we have, as a company, they've been deeply affected by coronavirus, of course, with events being cancelled, etc. So they've moved a lot of their events into digital versions. I think that's one of the real takeaways for me has been the speed at which people have been able to react. And also, Informer is very much, again, a very international company. It has offices all over the world. So there's a lot of intel coming in, and a lot of intel coming in quite early. Informer has a huge business out in China, for example. So it's part of the business was affected quite early on. So they were able to plan. They were able to get funding in place. And
I think I've seen that there's an Informer trade event has just taken place, actually, last week in China. Is that right?
Yeah, I think they're getting things back up and running. They're trying to do that. I mean, obviously, it's a very fast-moving situation. We saw just a couple of days ago, there was another small outbreak. I think it was in Beijing. So obviously, it's a very fast-moving situation. But I think the company is very well placed to adapt to those things. And I mean, a lot of the revenue as well, it's worth sort of reminding, does come from digital as well. So they've got a nice on both sides. But certainly, I mean, like everyone, it's been a hugely challenging time. But it also, I think, it's probably pushed us into ways of working that we probably should have been working in anyway. It's pushed us into that a little bit earlier. So, doing online discussions, seminars, things like that I think probably we might see that becoming more normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always great to see TBI is always obviously recognised for its really great in-depth coverage and feature coverage. So it's been great to see that coming through over the last few months. So Arun, take us through your first story. It's about Water Bear.
Yeah, that's correct. So yesterday I saw the announcement of the ZDF Enterprise and Advanced to launch a new network or channel on nature and the environmentally content. Of course, it's interesting to see that there's still people out there launching new platforms, which is great initiatives. The thing why I chose the article was more in a broader sense that I think it was only 6 months ago when that sort of things like environmental, getting the pollution back to a certain degree to prolong our life on this planet was the topic in the world. It's like that was it. So it's interesting to see now, like 6 months later, we have Corona pandemic. Now we, of course, have the diversity where everyone's jumping on, and we don't know what might be next. Hopefully nothing, but maybe in a few more months, we have something else where the world is occupied with. So it was more to show like our industry, and I think the media industry is so not vulnerable. Of course, everyone is, but it's so adaptable that there can be so many different topics, so many new trends going on in 6 months, maybe a week, or maybe especially a year. That all of these trends sometimes we see at MIPCOM during the week. That's old news the week after or 2 weeks after. So it's really interesting to see that we constantly have to adapt. I like the story of of you, Richard, saying we should do more digital conferences anyway. I think that's a great initiative. We all go out and see different things, but trends might change in the next 6 months. Maybe next year we say, when we hopefully have a vaccine and everything turns a little bit more to normal, we actually like to have more face-to-face meetings more than ever. And no one likes to have online conference anymore, because they want to see and shake hands and do the personal stuff. Suddenly, we don't know, and that's what I'm trying to say with this article. It is still a big topic. We need to preserve the earth for our future kids, and because of pandemic and other stuff that being pushed to the background.
Yeah,
it's interesting to see those trends changing.
No, absolutely, and you're right, and we that is something we discussed certainly in the earlier episodes of Telecast about the global climate crisis movement was really sort of reaching a peak and really starting to get some traction. And then the pandemic hit. Hopefully, when we come out of the pandemic, we're not going to go straight back to those old ways. Those old ways of flying too much, driving too much. Just become a little bit more conscientious, I suppose, in the way that we conduct our business and live our daily lives. And I think you're right. We've seen Water Bear has been announced, I think it was a couple of years ago or 18 months ago. So it's certainly been around, and which is obviously an initiative from Off the Fence, ZDF Enterprises owned Off the Fence. We still don't know what the business model is, do we? We know there's an ability there for consumers to watch the content and to donate to charities, which is one of the unique points about it, is that you watch a documentary, which it might be a Greenpeace documentary, and then there's the ability, it's interactive to the extent that you can actually go straight in there and make a donation, which is again a fantastic initiative. But do we know what the business model is in terms of how they're acquiring content, and is it a subscription-based model? Do we know?
Yeah, I believe it's a free model, and it was more connected with the partners and the NGOs across the world. They're also helping to make the platform bigger. So the subscribers, I think it's free, but then of course it's more to raise awareness and maybe donations in the end as well. But yeah, that's what I understand.
Yeah, maybe we can get Ellen or one of the team from Off the Fence on the show in a future edition to talk more about Water Bear. But certainly any initiative that further raises awareness of the issues when it comes to the natural world and climate crisis, and keeping that front of mind as we come out of that, it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Richard, so your first story is about content being pulled from networks around the world in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests. Take us through that.
Yeah, obviously we've seen protests, as you say, around the world following the death of George Floyd while in police custody. We saw some of the biggest media companies coming out to support Black Tuesday. And since then, we've been seeing some of the action that's been taken on screen as well. So probably the biggest news to come out of that at the moment is the fact that Cops, the long-running, I guess you call it a ride-along reality show, has been cancelled and pulled completely from Paramount Network, which is a Viacom CBS US cable channel. I mean, it's worth just sort of reflecting a little bit on how, Cops is a long-running show. It's been on air for more than 3 decades, launched in 1989, and it was cancelled before. It was on Fox previously, and then was picked up by Paramount after Fox cancelled it in 2013. But it's worth, just sort of reflecting on this is quite a big US show that has been pulled. And it's always, for the last decade or so, it's probably faced criticism, partly because of the sort of its perceived glorification of police aggression. And it looks like Viacom CBS have basically decided that actually it's just not fit to be aired at this time or in the future. And then obviously we had A&E pulling its unscripted police series Live PD, again a similar type of show to Cops in some ways. The interesting thing with these cancellations, and especially, Live PD, it's on reflection, it probably makes absolute sense that it was cancelled. But then if you rewind a couple of months, they just put a bumper order in for, I think it was 160 episodes from the producers, wow. Big Fish Entertainment. So on the one hand, we're seeing these big changes from especially the US media companies. we're seeing, these are quite big. These are quite big changes, and I mean, Live PD especially has been a hit show for A&E. It's spawned a couple of spin-offs. It did really well in the ratings. The fact that they're now pulling it suggests that perhaps there actually is some meaningful action taking place. But it's also worth remembering, this is admirable that they have cancelled it, but there are question marks over whether this show probably should have been on the air the last couple of months. How it moves forwards, we wait to see. Unfortunately, these sorts of deaths, especially in the US, but all over the world, the sort of police brutality, I guess you call it, it has happened before in the US. There have been protests about it. There have been calls for change, and people said they will change, and nothing really has changed that much, some might argue. So it will be interesting to see this time around. We've seen some initial action from the big media players. It will be interesting to see how that develops, and if this is sustained action, and there are moves to improve diversity to make sure that shows are on air that reflect the population and are produced by people, with proper representation behind the camera as well. Because it's been a problem in the content industry, no matter which country you're in, for probably forever. So I guess we're hoping, this time we might actually see some meaningful change, and it will be sustained.
We've also seen, lots of shows in the UK, and I'm sure internationally, being pulled as well. We have seen Little Britain pulled. We've seen Fawlty Towers. We've seen a number of different shows. We're looking through them in a different lens, and I think a lot of the producers and talent involved in those shows are perhaps looking at it and thinking, actually, that really wasn't appropriate now, particularly looking at it through the current light of day.
I also think it depends to me a little bit on what it is. I don't think it's a controversial opinion, but I always think if Little Britain or especially Fawlty Towers, if there's humor in it, if there's sarcasm in it or something it sparks thinking. I always if you rule out humor or something like this, the conversation might change without context. There's always only bad. There's no nuance in the conversation anymore. And I think a lot of those comedians and series, you need to be strong sometimes to actually make your point. I'm not saying racist jokes are good, but also if you see some of these stand-up comedians to a certain audience, whether that's maybe a Chinese comedian to Chinese people or a black comedian to the black community, they're also making strong jokes about anything, where we now think okay, maybe if someone else would have said it definitely is racist. So I'm trying to say humor is a big part of the conversation to make things better sometimes. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess satire, it's, the ability to make fun of anybody is, I suppose many people would see that as being a key pillar of freedom of speech, really. You should be allowed to satirize anybody, whether it be government, religion, whatever it might be. So it is a very, very interesting topic. There's obviously no shortage of views on all sides. And obviously a lot of broadcasters and producers are struggling with those issues now. So
one of the interesting developments, we saw Gone with the Wind taken off HBO Max, the new Viacom CBS streamer. And they've subsequently said, it was taken off because of its racist depictions and glorification of slavery. And I think the way they're going to tackle that is putting it back on the service, but have a historical context piece at the very start of the show. So, I think, like you say, is you can't just pretend Gone with the Wind never existed. You can't pretend that these shows didn't exist. They were of a time, obviously, and I think the way that some of the media companies seem to be looking to approach it is to make it clear that these shows, do contain offensive content and language. I think the Fawlty Towers is now back on UK TV as well, and again they're going to put sort of an offensive content and language warning up at the front of it. So I think it's important to almost note, there's an awareness, at least from the broadcasters and streaming companies, that perhaps wasn't there before, and and that seems to be one of the ways that they're trying to sort of tackle it, and especially with shows like Gone with the Wind. It probably it's an important part of the process that it is there, so people can kind of reflect a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's important that these new show notices provide that all-important context that I think it's become clear that we need. So, Arun, your second story is all about dating formats adapting to the times. Take us through that.
Yeah, it was more also, again, in general than about this specific idea is that social distancing in dating formats or Love Island or Temptation Island, how is it going to work in terms of how interesting will the show still be? Because in the end, people are watching for the juicy details and the juicy side of it.
Yeah.
If that falls through, what is left with the show? Of course, you can maybe instigate 14 days quarantine before and 14 days quarantine after recordings. But I was just more interesting to see why certain formats are being cancelled and why certain formats are going ahead. It was just interesting to see.
Yeah, we had Carlotta Rossi Spencer from Banijay on a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about Temptation Island. And actually, the fact is they're ready to go on a number of their different international productions of that format. But actually, they're waiting for air travel to come back. That's all they're waiting for. They've all been quarantined. They're all ready to go. All the cast and crew are ready. So I guess it's that, it's that quarantine, isn't it? It's that ability to have the cast all ready, all packed and in one place, and just waiting for the flights to come back. But no, you raised a good point in the week that ITV cancelled Love Island as well, Rich.
We knew about the summer cancellation, and they left that to the last minute, pretty much, with ITV's director of TV, Kevin Ligo, sort of admitting that it was going to be a huge commercial decision, and when they made it, it was one of those sort of necessities. But cancelling the winter version as well means that there's going to be quite a lag. I mean, it's going to be a huge hole in ITV2 schedule, especially. And I mean, the format, the UK sort of version of the format at least, has really had a torrid time of it. The winter version last year, of course, was hit by the tragic death of Caroline Flack. Then we've not had the summer version, and now the winter version's gone as well. So we're looking at 2021, ITV promising a bigger and better show, but it's going to leave some holes in some budgets. Yeah,
massive show. And I think they brought Australian Love Island onto ITV2.
They have indeed. Yeah, the version that aired on 9 in Australia it was originally aired in 2018, so I think you have to be a fairly ardent Love Island fan to want to watch that.
Yeah, I was actually looking at some of the social media around that, and there's a lot of spoilers being discussed. I suppose it's a pale imitation of what could have been, but you can't blame them, right? You can't blame ITV2 for putting that front and centre, really.
No, absolutely. And I think, it'll be interesting to see sort of how Banijay get on with their shows, and if they manage to make it happen. And it'll be interesting sort of in 6 months' time to look back on that ITV decision about Winter Love Island and see if it was the right decision made. It's an early call. I guess time will tell if it's the right call or not.
Yeah. Arun, have you ever thought about reality formats for Insight TV?
Well, we're doing adventure reality, but that kind of dating reality is not for our DNA because of some of the restrictions we have.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, so your second story is about a BBC shortfall. Take us through that one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one that sort of brings the international side of the business into the UK. So BBC Studios, the international sales, distribution, production arm of the BBC, has obviously been affected like everyone with COVID-19 outbreak. So it's been unable to produce as many shows and sell as many shows as it normally would. So a couple of weeks back, it alluded to the fact that it was probably going to have to reduce its contribution to the BBC in the UK. And it emerged just recently that they're actually going to cancel their dividend altogether. Last year that dividend stood at £65 million, which is just north of $80 million. And it's kind of this drip effect of impacts on the BBC in the UK. So they've already had to postpone some job cuts, which are going to save money. They've already had to postpone the cancellation of free licenses for over 75-year-olds in the UK, which again is going to cost money. So we've seen the BBC it's done extremely well during the pandemic. It's been sort of the go-to broadcaster, reaffirmed itself at the centre of the UK media landscape, and built itself up a lot of goodwill against a government that perhaps might well attack it in the weeks and months and years to come. But at the same time, it is storing up problems for the future because it's going to have quite a big deficit to make up. And it's going to be intriguing to see where it makes up that saving, because it's going to have to make it at some point. It can't just keep postponing its budget cuts.
Yeah. Or challenges for the new Director General, who's just been installed a few days ago. He's got a pretty big inbox to deal with, not least wrangling with the government about all sorts of funding issues. Fascinating story. And, we're going to see some cuts, aren't we? We're going to see some cuts, surely channel-wise. I mean, we've talked about BBC 4, BBC 3 coming back, BBC 4 perhaps disappearing. Any other clues on what they might look to save money going forward?
So, yeah, as you say, BBC 4 channel brand is certainly under pressure. And the interesting thing with that was the fact that its editor, Cassian Harrison, is working at BBC Studios, the commercial arm, and they've alluded to the fact that they're going to potentially launch BBC 4 as a sort of SVOD streamer internationally. We've now got the BBC Studios boss going to become the BBC Director General. So, we've got there's a lot of commercially minded people at the top of the BBC in the UK now. And it would be, a lot of the signs point to the fact that, the BBC is going to have to be very canny in the way it spends its money and very canny in the way it generates its money. And it's now got the person who knows most about sort of the BBC's value internationally at the top of its UK-based organisation. So I think there are lots of interesting plans probably in the works. They've got lots of strategy documents that I've spoken to execs over there, and there are certainly there are plans in the works, I think, and it will be fascinating to see how Tim Davie deals with the political pressure and also the funding pressures which are inevitably going to come, and increasingly the way that BBC Studios is used as a conduit to the rest of the world to generate money if that licence fee that BBC is so used to does come to an end or turn into some sort of subscription model.
Well, I guess now more than ever, we talked about crisis bringing on change and accelerating change. And I guess we're going to see that not only in lots of different commercial companies, but the BBC and its commercial arms as well. So it's, as you say, it's going to be fascinating to see, and no doubt something we're going to be talking about at length as we go forward on telecast. So it's the time of the show where we get to nominate your hero of the week and who you're going to be telling to get in the bin. So, Arun, who's your hero of the week?
Yeah, so it was in general, right? So it's not someone from the business. It was more something which sparked the news over a couple of days. It was Patrick Hutchinson, from the guy who actually carried the Against Lives Matter protesters, the white guy, out of the pretty difficult situation. It brought him to safety. Of course, that act, is remarkable by its own. I also like the fact what he said. Like, of course, I needed to save this man, to save his life. The other thing is also he prevented the change in narrative in a protest from Black Lives Matter, but they kill other people. That he stopped that. He stopped that feeling right there, because if that man actually died by Black Lives Matter protesters, it becomes a totally different conversation. So he did, without knowing it himself, he did a lot for that initiative to stay, I would say, sane and honest.
Yeah, that's right. There's a fantastic interview with him, actually, that I'll put a link in the description of the podcast to that he talks about, what happened and what drove him to rescue this. I mean, we don't know if he was a far-right sympathizer. A lot of people expect he was, but there was certainly an altercation between Black Lives Matter and suspected far-right extremists. And as you say, this one guy was set upon, and our hero and his friends, a group of them, actually came together and
they protected him while was carrying the guy away. And also, I would love to do, maybe you can do that, Justin. Love to do an interview with the guy who was actually rescued. What his minds or thoughts are, from that perspective. Now he went through this. That's would be really interesting to hear.
Absolutely right. Well, hopefully, if he is somebody that, one of the hooligans that came down to London with nothing other than their minds and causing trouble, then hopefully it did change his mind. And I'm sure seeing that act played out, across media globally, not only in the UK, will hopefully change a few other people's minds as well.
Yeah.
So, no, absolutely, we can certainly agree with your hero of the week there. Richard, who's your hero of the week?
Well, my hero of the week, of the past couple of months, I'm going to say paddling pools, parks and green spaces.
Right.
Paddling pools have kept me, a paddling pool has kept me sane. I've got a 4-year-old boy who, during lockdown, was very energetic, as 4-year-old boys tend to be. And the paddling pool kept him sane and entertained and fairly enclosed. So, as lockdowns sort of come down around the world, and we're a little bit freer now in the UK, I'd like to put forward my paddling pool as a saviour and something that allowed me to keep working from home to some degree of efficiency. Paddling pool is the one for me.
Yeah, I think anybody who's got an outside space, any sort of outside space during this lockdown is blessed, really. And I think it only makes you think of people who are less fortunate, and who have been cooped up in, flats without outdoor spaces. It must be really difficult. And you're right, parks. It gets us to think about, our outdoor space and how valuable they really are. Nobody, everyone takes parks in the cities for granted, but they've really come into their own now. And as long as you're 2 meters apart from everybody else, it's quite interesting. Our local park has got all these new pathways across it. It's like zigzags, like a spider's web of people trying to avoid each other.
Yeah, definitely. I think those green spaces and those parks, especially the past couple of months, deserve a lot of recognition and people that look after them. And perhaps takes them to conversation, the joys of working from home, and there's some challenges as well. So,
yeah, that's a good one. And Arun, who or what are you telling to get in the bin?
Yeah, I think we touched upon it a little bit earlier already, but for me it was indeed, again, to the diversity conversation. It was the BBC who actually were removing the episode of the Germans from Fawlty Towers because of some of the things that were said there. Yeah, I think I made my point earlier saying, if you take out humor and satire in the conversation, it becomes very bland, and I think the conversation will be stuck. It doesn't move ahead. And also, to look at some of these iconic episodes like this, it was actually to raise a point on racism and stuff like that, instead of advocating it. And certainly John Cleese gave his opinion yesterday about the BBC pretty strongly. That so I do sympathize with that to a degree. It's something else to at least strategically look at things down the line instead of making these sudden changes. I think it needs to be needs to have a little bit more thought before you do something like that. But that's again my opinion.
And I believe that's now been reinstated, hasn't it, on UK TV?
Yeah, with a warning.
Yeah, with a warning now. So I think
which actually proves the point. It actually proves the point of John Cleese and some of us saying, people are some of the companies are just doing it to protect themselves. Of course, you need to do that, but to a certain degree, I would say.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I completely agree. I think we've seen in the past, media companies are very quick to sort of get on bandwagons and portray themselves as very virtuous. What we want to see this time is some actual, meaningful change and sustained change, not as Arun sort of alluded to, sort of change that perhaps doesn't persist.
Yeah, absolutely,
exactly. Yeah.
And Richard, who or what are you telling to get in the bin this week?
I'm going to tell Britain First to get in the bin, which is a far-right organisation. Quite a few of their members, if you can call them members, went down to the UK capital, London, to cause trouble, as you said earlier. Basically, Black Lives Matter has raised a really important discussion point, and the protests, whether or not they should be going on under lockdown or whatever, they've created a discussion, and there's a bit of two-way going on about what needs to change for the betterment of everyone. And Britain First and the far right by pretending that they're defending statues of Winston Churchill and the Cenotaph. It's just reprehensible. There's just no place, I don't think, for them in the UK. We need to have proper discussions about how things need to change. As Arun sort of said earlier, Patrick Hutchinson, perfect portrayal, sort of to counter everything that Britain First stand for. My get in the bin will be Britain First, and hopefully they'll stay there.
Absolutely. And, it sadly reminds me of all of the times when we've seen international football tournaments and England playing all over the world and, hundreds, because it's not more than that. It's just a few hundred hooligans that have decided to come together and cause trouble. And that's it. And you can't see any of those followers, certainly not from the evidence that we saw on TV, that anybody had any sort of reasonable argument. They were clearly planning to get drunk and cause trouble, and who knows what their real motivation is, but quite right. And unfortunately, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing, I think, for Britain on a world stage to have people like that call their organisation Britain First, because certainly, I don't think any right-minded person would want to associate, the country or the Union Jack or anything like that with people like that. Well, thanks very much, Arun and Richard, for joining this week. It's been fantastic to have you on the show. Really interesting points, as ever. So it's been brilliant to speak to you, and we hope to see you again in person before too long.
Thank you very much.
That's great. That's great.
Thanks, Justin.
So it's that time in the show where we head over to Hollywood and catch up with Peter White from Deadline. How you doing, Peter?
Hey, Justin. I'm good. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad, actually. It's been sunny in London this week, so the sun's returned. It's never gone away in LA, has it?
It hasn't. No, it hasn't. And we've been able to enjoy it a little bit more over the last week. I went to a real life restaurant this weekend, which was a bit of a buzz. First time in a few months. So yeah, we're starting to enjoy some of things like that.
A real life restaurant. I can only dream about things like that in London, but we'll get there. Well, we're all living vicariously through anybody that has access to a restaurant. So, so I hear that their scripted production has restarted in the US. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, we've been talking about reopening Hollywood since you started this show, Justin. So it's interesting to have some actual news. Not the buzziest title in the world, but The Bold and the Beautiful is the first scripted series to be back in production. In fact, started yesterday, Wednesday, which is Wednesday, June 17th, here in LA, in Television City. It's obviously a daytime soap, but it's really interesting how they're doing it. I mean, a lot of this stuff is things people expected. You've got all of the COVID-19 safety protocols. There's a coordinator who's going to be on set all the time, and the crew members are going to wear masks, and there's obviously lots of safety guidelines. But it's interesting that they've been able to get this back up and running. One of the things that has caused a little bit of a slowdown in this is that actually the producers need to reach agreements with the Hollywood guilds before anyone can get actually back on set. So they've done that. They've tested the cast and crew, and they're going to keep doing that. I think the shooting days will be slightly shorter, and they've talked about staggered call times and smaller cast on set at each time. But yeah, things are moving. So we'll see if that gives any indication with some of the bigger shows. But you certainly see with the broadcast networks looking at fall premieres for a lot of shows that they're hoping that they can do the same. On the non-scripted side, I did a big piece last week that looked at some of the shows like Got Talent and Love Island on CBS, which is likely to happen in the States, even though it's not going to happen in Britain this year. Okay. And looking at from that side of things, which will be interesting. There's a lot of talk of quarantine reality shows. You'll see Love Island. People will be in that bubble. Same goes for the Bachelorette, which ABC is going to do under quarantine. and we're so we're sort of moving in that direction. I think July and August are going to be big, busy times for producers.
Yeah, it just shows you how important those soaps, those daytime dramas, and the reality shows are for networks around the world, because, they are there, as Girts was talking about in one of his earlier appearances on the podcast. They're almost like the lighthouse, aren't they? They define the channel. So those are the ones that they're desperate to get back on as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. They might not be the sexiest things in the world, but they definitely provide a backbone to the schedules, and right now that's what people need.
Yeah, absolutely. And Neighbours is coming back, I think, in July in EastEnders as well. So we're seeing all of that picking up around the world. That's interesting. Well, that's good. And maybe it's a pointer as well in terms of the way that they're going to manage the production, as you say, for those bigger scripted dramas that to starting them getting back into production as well.
Another interesting aspect to it is the Americans are looking around the world. They're looking to places that have done this successfully. You mentioned Australia there. Obviously, things in Scandinavia have come back a little bit quicker. So, the Americans aren't necessarily known for taking lessons from around the world, other than a few formats here and there. But yeah, I think you're looking at some of the shows. Ninja Warrior on NBC is they're looking at how they do that in Germany, for instance, which I don't think they probably would have done beforehand. So and the same goes for some of the scripted titles. So,
all right.
So yeah, I think that the world is going to stay global as this pandemic rages on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really interesting stuff. And also, we've been talking about the upfronts or the upfronts that were, or maybe weren't, over the last few weeks. We talked about the CW picking up English language shows last week, and there's some more movement on that side this week.
Yeah, they're still going. Fair play to the CW. Last week they had Devils. They had the Patrick Dempsey show. You had the Canadian show Coroner, Dead Pixels, which was the British comedy. And they've just announced 4 more, which these are things that I'll be honest, I'm very surprised they weren't necessarily on a list of shows I would have watched out for. Taskmaster probably being the biggest one. They haven't exactly said which season. I'm going to guess it's the most recent UK TV season, but actually they've got so many of those that they might take one from an earlier run with maybe high profile stars. So we'll watch out for that. There's an ITV2 show called Killer Camp, which comes from Tuesday's Child, which part of the Greenbird world, the sort of horror competition series. You've got a docu-series, Being Reuben, which features this YouTuber, and another Canadian reality show, a cooking competition called Fridge Wars, right, which does exactly what it says on the tin, I think. But it's interesting that they're continuing to go in this way. These shows will be for their summer schedule, launching largely in end of July and the beginning of August. They've moved a lot of their originals towards the end of the year and next year, so they're filling up. So it'll be interesting to see if they've got any more plans for this, or whether that's it. But yeah, I certainly think for British producers, Canadian producers, and distributors, there's definitely been more sales than I can certainly remember to the American networks. You used to always write about these things as an anomaly, but the CW has certainly picked up a few more. And you never know, depending on what happens over the next few months, the likes of NBC, ABC, and CBS might join them if they have any holes. There was some discussion today. ABC launched their schedule. They sort of explained where shows were going to sit in the next lineup, and Carrie Burke even sort of said she was open to the idea of the Mandalorian Disney Plus show going on ABC. So I know that's in house, but it just sort of points to they are thinking ahead in terms of what gaps they might need to fill, and if there's more British shows that are done and in the can that might not have aired in the States, then so be it. Yeah. So good news for those companies.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, actually, in some of these networks that, what has previously been a very tightly defined channel brand that shows a particular type of show that hits particular demographics, now taking shows that would never have dreamed of, 3-4 months ago. And it's going to be interesting to see how they can, really keep their own definition of their own brand, if you like, going forward through this. especially if they're taking these shows that maybe will dissipate that brand that they've built up.
I think that's why the CW has been at the front of this, because they have this younger skewing identity, which fits a little bit more, particularly with the likes of ITV2 and E4. So they have a bit more of a kinship there, whereas I think that the other networks don't really have that same thing with the British channels like BBC and ITV and Channel 4. So it would seem a little bit odd. But even the CW is doing that. You know, I think we said this last week with Devils, because that's a much older skewing show. You know, Patrick Dempsey, you know, it's for a slightly older and female audience, which isn't really what the CW does, but it's a Finnish show with an A-list star, so they'll have that as well as some of the stuff with YouTubers. So I think they're worried less about the idea of brand identity over the next few months, and they just really want to entertain people. So I think that's going to be the first thing, and when things go back, they'll probably worry about that a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, thanks as ever. Really interesting catching up. Enjoy the restaurants, enjoy the California life. And we look forward to catching up with you same time next week.
Thanks, Justin. I'm off to watch the Premier League on NBC, so that'll be a bit of a...
Premier League's back, football's back all over Europe as well. So that's going to be great to see Leeds win promotion, and maybe Liverpool win the Premier League as well. Finally,
absolutely.
All right. Okay. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, Justin.
So we've reached that time in the show to catch up with K7 Media's Girts Licis. Girts, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Another week in lockdown, still surviving.
Well, exactly. Don't say surviving. We have opportunities as well.
We do have opportunities. That's absolutely right. So you've been gazing into your TV tea leaves this week.
I was trying hard. Since we are seeing more new activity emerging back in studios and on production sets, I thought I would just bring you on a quick tour around the world today, giving some update on what's happening and perhaps what's some broader context, the lessons already learned or the practices that might be useful to know and perhaps adapt elsewhere.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's what we all need, a world tour of the TV production landscape. All right.
Okay, let's go. So to start with, I don't want to call it a trend yet, but what I find quite a paradox actually is that following these months of being locked at homes, after which one would expect that everybody must be thirsty to just get somewhere outside, enjoy the summer as much as it's possible, and try to forget about everything that reminds of some kind of lockdown, one of the first shows we see emerging in production in various countries is Big Brother, or other shows with a similar premise. In Australia, for instance, Big Brother has been brought back after several years' break. It launched last week on 7 and supercharged the broadcaster's time slot by 55% week on week, brought in younger audience and beat not just some shows on the other networks airing in the same slot, but two of the biggest reality giants, The Voice and MasterChef.
Wow.
That's crazy. And I have already mentioned before about the record high interest to join the Big Brother house in Finland, for instance. But also the show is coming back in Israel and some other countries. And in Spain, they are at least providing an alternative for participants to kind of migrate between a house and a garden. Telecinco launched a new primetime reality last week called The Safe House, La Casa Fuerte, in which 7 famous couples live in a villa, but are divided into 2 groups, those who have a bedroom inside the house and those who must camp in the garden. And those in the house must take part in a series of different challenges to earn money, while those in the garden must try and overthrow those in the house and take their place, whilst also having to carry out all the chores. And it's up to audience to vote whether a resident couple deserves to stay in the house or be replaced by one living in the garden. And this show has also launched very, very strongly with a 22% share. And then, of course, another element that can be easily added to the living together in a house setting is dating. And as you may remember me mentioning before, That's another genre where we see a huge interest from potential participants in various markets. So I think it's not surprising that shows like Singletown are starting to fly as well. A new commission has been recently announced for Discovery Networks in Norway, which is casting already. And shooting is expected to take place in Oslo in July. And it is interesting to note that this production is going to replace X on the Beach, which is a very popular show in Norway already, but can't be filmed currently due to the COVID restrictions. And for those who don't know, Singleton is basically a should I stay or should I go type of relationship show in which 5 couples press pause on their partnerships and enjoy a summer as singletons, going on dates while living together with the other 4 of a similar fate before making that big decision. It's very flexible, scalable, fast turnaround. It doesn't require traveling, and it provides fun escapist viewing and particularly attracting younger audiences. I think it's a formula that I believe many channels must be trying to crack at the moment.
Yeah, not only channels, but probably distributors as well, right?
Yes, definitely. As I've said before, particularly now, it's very important for distributors of existing formats to be flexible and see beyond the format description and trust the local producers and channels when they propose a certain twist, as long as it doesn't contradict with the very DNA of the format, of course. One good example, and yet another very fast turnaround idea, has been achieved in Italy, where Rai Uno last Sunday already premiered the Norwegian hit format Top 10, which is a studio-based primetime entertainment show airing live in an Italian version. And the original format sees 2 teams of 2 celebrities compete to uncover the top 10 hits of a given year, while artists from the year in question are interviewed and all top 10 songs are performed. But in Italy, the format has been tweaked to include different popular cultures' top 10s alongside the music hits, such as film or TV shows, for instance. And the first episode became the most watched show in Italy on Sunday night. Music is, of course, also a universal language, and a new musical talent show has just launched also in Netherlands. It's called We Want More and features talent from any musical background trying to impress the jury. And the twist here is that the jurors are able to vote up until the very last second of the performance, but they can also take away vote at any time. Another thing is that I think it's very, very encouraging and sends a very positive signal to others that there are broadcasters which dare to commit to production of new big formats currently, like Germany's ProSieben, which has just announced a July launch date for a show called Watch. It's a variety meets game show format in which 2 teams of 4 must watch a high-class variety act before trying to win money by remembering as many details as possible about the show they just watched. And another thing, there is, of course, still a very thin line, not only in respect to what can be produced, particularly in a studio, but also how audiences are actually going to react. In Chile, for instance, the local TV dance competition show Dancing for the Dream by Lando por and Sueño has received thousands of complaints since returning to air a couple of weeks ago, as the viewers have been complaining about the show bringing a false feeling of returning to normality, as well as a lack of masks and nonconformity with social distancing. So it just reminds us once again that the role of television is to be seen also as setting and adhering to the standards which are expected from the rest of the population.
Interesting. So does that mean that audiences prefer a real reality as opposed to like a fantasy reality?
It's very well put, I think, actually. The pandemics obviously are going to influence the programming for many more months, even if we are saying that we don't want to see anything virus-related anymore. And I think we can expect different consumer shows emerging, for instance, testing everything from hotels and shops to restaurants and spas and how prepared they are for post-COVID business, for example. We will also continue seeing different advice and DIY ideas related to this reality, at least to some extent. In the Netherlands, for instance, a holiday-related consumer show, Max Holiday Man, has returned with an aim to answer the many questions viewers have around travel this summer. And I think the crisis has also opened our eyes in respect to people who have been working in the front line of the pandemics, and we can expect more shows looking into their daily lives Like in Belgium, for instance, Flemish celebrities are going to experience what it takes to be a nurse, as they will go through an intensive training before getting fully immersed into the life of nursing, with early starts, night shifts, and unpredictable patient care. But we also have to recognize the various creative, even fun solutions found during the pandemics, like fishing bingo in Denmark, for instance, having 90 numbered anglers fishing at the same time. And when one of the anglers catches a fish, that number is drawn in a bingo competition for the viewers who play along at home.
Fishing bingo.
Yeah.
Fishing bingo. Okay. That's brilliant. I'm going straight onto YouTube to see if I can find any clips of fishing bingo from Denmark. This current situation, it doesn't fail to amaze all these amazing new formats and creatives that are coming through.
Absolutely. And yes, and it is also interesting to notice how even public broadcasters have started to quickly adapt to the actual viewing habits, like co-viewing, for example. Like Dutch podcaster NPO, which has added a new feature to its VOD player, allowing several people to watch a show together remotely in a virtual living room created using their webcams. And then, of course, I have to mention the solidarity and sharing of the best practice and know-how that has emerged from this crisis on a totally new level. And in some cases, it has even developed into new promising business ideas, like in Brazil, where an OTT provider has recently launched a new VOD platform in collaboration with various cinema chains. It's called Cinema Virtual. It is entirely dedicated to film premieres, offering films which had not been released in cinemas due to pandemics. And a certain percentage of the revenues received from subscriptions and movie rentals on this platform is going back to cinema chains. So you see, there are many more initiatives worth talking about, of course, particularly with some pretty big scripted projects restarting production already. So I think I'll better have the scripted review for the next week, as the situation is obviously changing quite rapidly.
All right. Well, that sounds fantastic. We haven't actually looked at scripted for a few weeks, so I think that's
for quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a great time to go back and see what's happening in that area. So, Girts, as ever, fantastic overview. Thank you for taking us on a world tour of TV production and what's happening. There's obviously some really creative ideas happening out there. I'm going to go and look at some fishing bingo now. So,
have fun.
Yeah. So, thanks again, Girts. Look forward to hearing from you on Scripted next week.
See you next week. Take care.
Well, that's about it for this week's show. Thanks for listening. And please rate and subscribe to the show and share it with friends and colleagues. If you want to hear more about our advertising and sponsorship packages, please email justin@boomdialogue.com. That's justin@boomdialogue.com. We'll be back with another show next week. So in the meantime, stay safe. Are you tired of the same old streaming options? Introducing Myco, the revolutionary Web3 content platform where you can not only watch films, TV shows, user-generated content, live events, and listen to podcasts, but earn from them too. Myco commissions and produces content that connects and empowers both viewers and creators in a fully decentralized video ecosystem. With live monetization, crowdfunding, NFT gating, and even the opportunity for fractional ownership of content, Myco is changing the game. Myco, join the conversation and start earning today. Download the app from the Apple and Google Play app stores.